Hey everyone, just wanted to welcome everyone to our virtual Stories from Scouts Roundtable. My name's Jared Sandler. I'm looking forward to my 6th year with the Rangers Radio Network alongside the Hall of Famer Eric Nadel and the future Hall of Famer Matt Hicks. Before we get going, and this is going to be a really fun hour because if you don't know, Scouts typically have the best stories of anyone in baseball, and excited to hear our 3 guests of honor share some of those stories. But I just wanted to thank all of you for your past support and your continued support of the Rangers. I know these are weird times, but please know that your partnership means a lot. So thank you very much. This session is going to be recorded and streamed on YouTube. So in case you'd like to share or rewatch, maybe you get up, go to the bathroom, miss something, whatever the case, you will be able to go back and catch anything you might have missed. And you're certainly encouraged to share this with your friends, anyone who you think might be interested. So they wanted me to give you some personal background, but I want to make sure we get to the real stars of the show, the 3 scouts I'll be introducing shortly. But I'll say this: I'm just like most of you, I'd imagine. I'm a big baseball fan and a big Rangers fan, and not just because I'm in this position, but I grew up in DFW. So Rangers baseball has always been a special part of my life, and I'm so thankful that I get the chance to be a part of the radio team and to get to be a part of events like this with all of you. So I'm excited to hear from the Scouts and some of their great stories. But first, I want to introduce the Senior Vice President of Ticket Sales and Services, Paige Farragut.
Hi, everybody. We are so happy to have you here today, and we look forward to these great stories from some of our scouts. And most importantly, we look forward to hosting you at Globe Life Field in our beautiful new ballpark very soon. So sit back and enjoy the next hour, and I will kick it back to Jared.
All right. Thanks, Paige. All right, so let's get the show going. First, I want to introduce our 3 scouts. This particular gentleman is entering his 29th season in the Rangers organization, his 11th overseeing the club's amateur scouting operation, and his 6th with his current title, Senior Director of Amateur Scouting. That means a lot of his efforts culminate in the draft, which will begin in a little under 2 weeks. He's also the proud papa of Jed and Jackson, who wrapped up their collegiate careers last year. I'd like to introduce Kip Fagg. Hey, Kip.
Hey, Jared. How you doing, man? Glad to be here.
Great. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Took a little break from grinding some of these guys out here for another week or so, a little over a week to get ready to pick some more Rangers.
Get you out of that draft room for a bit. This gentleman was named the organization's 2019 Red Jackets Scout of the Year. He's entering his 11th season as a special assistant in scouting and player evaluation with the direct line of communication to Rangers general manager John Daniels. It's his 29th season as a scout, having previously spent time with the Padres, the Braves, and the Pirates. He comes from a big baseball family. His brother Dave's a former GM, and his son Tyler was drafted by the Reds a few years ago. I'd like to introduce Scott Littlefield. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Jared. What's going on, man? Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. And Scott and I were texting yesterday about California. Kip's a Washington State guy. I think Scott sides a little more with me in the Southern California area. So it's good to have someone on my team when I'm in a room with Kip.
Oh, no doubt. Anytime we can file on Kip, where I'm on board.
Exactly. This next gentleman's entering his 29th season, and you catch a theme here. All 3 of these scouts have been in baseball for almost 3 decades. But for this particular gentleman, 29th season with the Rangers. He was the organization's Scout of the Year in 2018. He's responsible for signing a number of all-star big leaguers like Ian Kinsler, among others. He was inducted in the Midwest Scouts Association Hall of Fame in 2010. And before all of this, in 1984, he finished 4th in the Northwest League in hitting, helping the Rangers Tri-Cities affiliate to a Northwest League title. And he's also just one of the most passionate, genuine people you'll ever meet. I'd like to introduce to you Mike Grouse. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Jared, how are you? Thanks for mentioning my 1 year of playing professionally. That was awesome.
Well, I think you got shorted. I mean, you finished 4th in the batting title, and
He was 2 for 6.
I'm not sure my 85 at bats qualified, but thanks anyway. I appreciate it.
They qualify for us. All right, so let's get this started just with a simple question. I'm sure all of you have been asked this and thought about this. Kip, we'll start with you, and then we'll go around. Who's been your favorite player to scout?
There's been so many over the years. I mean, few come to mind. Josh Beckett, for one, when I saw him in high school, was like the fiery competitor with really good stuff, and he wasn't afraid to go under somebody's chin, and he was probably one of the better ones I've seen as far as like as an amateur high school player. Probably as a hitter, I have to say probably A-Rod or Josh Hamilton, so to speak, as amateurs. They're both like big tools, obviously high picks, both went 1-1, but I mean, incredible talents and fun to watch back then.
Scott, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I could go through thousands of players. I actually had Alex Rodriguez in my area when he was an amateur. So I spent a lot of time with him, watched him as a junior and senior in high school. So that was kind of he's the best amateur player I've ever scouted personally. Probably the best pitcher was Strasburg. Maybe the best stuff I've ever seen as an amateur. But yeah, over the years, like I would say between the three of us, we've probably seen 80-90% of the players in the big leagues before they got there. So it's kind of a unique perspective in that part.
Grouse?
Yeah, I don't know if I really have a favorite, Jared. I mean, several players come to mind. I mean, personally, Travis Hafner was a lot of fun to scout. Saw him as an amateur in North Dakota as a shortstop, and watching him progress from there and just become the person he is. I mean, I've just been fortunate to develop a lot of friendships with these guys, and there's so many good players. I would hate to single one out, but like Lit said, we are fortunate and blessed to have seen the majority of the guys in the big leagues, and that's what makes scouting special.
All right, so you mentioned Travis Hafner. I know, sometimes I guess the process of scouting a guy and signing a guy is pretty basic or common. I know that Travis Hafner maybe presented a little bit of a unique story. If you wouldn't mind, what was that, journey like for you in scouting Travis Hafner and then ultimately signing him while, I believe, riding on a bus?
Yeah, we had taken Travis the year before in 1996 as what was called a draft and follow. You could draft junior college players that you felt like were going to be prospects were maybe not necessarily ready. And that was Travis's case. I wanted him to get an extra year at Cali. Cali County is a great program. Former professional players coach there, and they teach the right way. So I felt like an extra year there would be a benefit. They ended up going to the Junior College World Series in Grand Junction in '97. So I had to fly to Grand Junction to try to sign him, because you're up against the time on signing a player before the next draft. Well, they kept winning. Finally, they were in the final game. They ended up winning the Junior College World Series, but I was out of time to sign him. So I didn't have time to fly home to Kansas City and then drive down to Ark City, Kansas. So the coaches at Cali suggested I ride the bus back with the team. So there I am on a 16 and a half hour bus ride from Grand Junction, Colorado. Every time the bus would stop, Travis and I would get off. We'd go to the payphone, because there was no cell phones back then. We would call his mother. His mother would get on the CB radio. She would talk to the dad who was on the combine in the field. We'd get back on the bus, ride for another few hours. And it ended up, we signed him with about 10, 15 minutes before the deadline that night. We got back into Ark City, and he ended up becoming a pretty good player. But it's a good story from riding the bus and just being a part of something for those kids. When they rolled into Ark City, the reception they got from that town, I was juiced. I was on the bus waving at people and just trying to be a part of it as well. And it was a special moment for those kids. I know they'll never forget. And Travis and I talk about it. He had the chance to tell the story, and bless his heart, in the story, he referred to me as the scout. He wouldn't even use my name. I'm like, come on, dude, give me some credit for riding that bus.
Before there was Gronk, there was Pronk, and Rangers fans might remember that was Travis's nickname. And when Mike said, he was originally a shortstop, it's kind of funny, because if you recall Travis as a big leaguer, he in no way resembled a shortstop physically. But if I'm not mistaken, you also, in watching him learned that he didn't like getting intentionally walked.
He hated getting intentionally walked. They were playing a junior college out of Oklahoma, and they were ranked like 3 or 4 at the time. They were a dominating club, but they had the bases loaded in the bottom of the 7th inning. It was a home game. Their last at bat. They're trailing 5-2, and Travis is coming up. Well, they intentionally walked him to force in a run to make it 5-3. He's running to first base, and he's a big boy for his age. He's running down that line. He's challenging everybody in that other dugout, calling them every name you could imagine. And the next hitter ends up smoking one in the gap, and he's coming around third base to score the 6th run. And the catcher wanted no play. He's waving them, don't throw it, please, just don't throw it to me. And Cali ended up winning that game. It was some kind of fun to watch a 19-year-old be so aggressive like he wanted to win so bad, such a passion.
Scott, I read a story of a relationship you shared with Sean Figgins, and Rangers fans would probably remember Sean because he played with the Angels for a bit of time, in the division. But what can you share with us about the relationship you developed with him and kind of following his journey from, I guess, being kind of like an assistant to being a decade-long major leaguer?
Yeah, Figgy was a 9th grader, I guess, the first time I ran into him. I had started scouting in 92, end of 91, and I got moved down to Florida, changed my area, started in the Northeast, got moved down to Florida. And I ended up living in like East Tampa area. It was Brandon. And I'll try to make it as short as possible, but I used to use the field. I got friendly with the coach, and I used to use his ball field for workouts a lot. So every time I bring a couple guys over for, batting practice or hit them fungos or whatever, it was always this little kid on the side that would just be hanging out. I mean, he was tiny. I thought he was like a 6th grader. Anyway, I saw him play catch against the wall one day. I said, I look like he could play a little bit. I said, hey man, you mind catching me up, loosen this kid up for me and different stuff. And this is, so he told me his name was Sean. And, and he was a nice kid. I mean, but when I mean small, this guy was like 5'1" and about 120 pounds. Anyway, as years went by, every time I'd show up at the park, Figgy was always there. So I ended up getting his phone number to his house. And so every time I go over there, I call him, hey, Figgy, meet me at the park. I got to work out. And he would play first base if I had infielders, or play third base if I had outfielders throwing. Sometimes I'd get a catcher's mitt in his hand if I couldn't find a catcher. I mean, he would like help me out constantly. And great kid, and loved to play, but once again, small. So as the years go by, he gets to be a senior. Now he's a pretty good little player. However, like, I don't really see it, which is kind of embarrassing later on, but I have this big workout at the end of the year, and I got like 6 or 7 of kind of the best players in the state of Florida in. So I got all my guys coming in, all my cross checkers and scouting director and all that stuff. And so I call Figgy. I said, hey, Figgy, you mind? I go, I'm going to let you get in on this one, kind of a favor stuff, which looking back was probably a mistake. He worked out and he played good. He could play short. He could really throw. He could run, but it was just a light bat. And so long story short, the 6 or 7 players that got drafted prior to him, I think 2 of them made it to the big leagues, like short stint. Figgy went in the 4th round to Colorado and played 10 years in the big leagues. So the sad part was, like, I knew him so well that I just kind of whiffed on him. It wasn't like I didn't know him. I knew he loved to play. He actually had good skills. I just knew him so well. I just never really kind of looked past it. And it was, one of my many mistakes along the way, but I did see him when he got to the big leagues with the Angels. I live out here in LA, and I would say maybe that first week that he was in the big leagues, I was at the park, and I went down early during batting practice, and I waved him over, and we laughed. I mean, we laughed so hard talking about, like, I go, man, Figgy, I cannot believe you're in here in the big leagues. I go, and first thing he says, yeah, I know you did. You barely let me hang out with you. I said, that's not true. I go, I made you the utility guy that you are from using all those gloves I made you use as a kid.
Well, and I think, and we're going to get into this, but the relationships that you all develop with the players is really special and really unique. It's way deeper than just, hey, I'm going to watch you play and try to sign you. And we're definitely going to get into that. Kip, I think one of your interesting stories, if I'm not mistaken, involves an outfielder who spent lots of time in the big leagues playing for, I think, the Braves and the Royals and the A's. I think maybe you know who I'm talking about. What's the story behind this gentleman?
I was in early years of scouting. I know the early 90s, 91. I think it was 91 actually. And I'm living in Northern California, kind of my first job. Back in those days, you know, as Grouse alluded to, we didn't have cell phones, computers, anything. So you basically had a stopwatch and a radar gun, one of them big Decatur things that weighed like 50 pounds. You had to carry around old school radar guns. But anyway, so they just threw us out there to start our craft, so to speak. But I was at a local watering hole one night after the games, and with another a friend of mine, and a guy in the bar told me, "Hey, the best player in this town is not even playing high school baseball." I go, "Yeah, you hear that stuff all the time." "Yeah, right, whatever." And so he said, and I listened to it, and the other guy, the other scout that I was with, didn't really pay that much attention. But I asked the guy's name. And I went home and looked up the phone number and called the kid just to see, kind of, you got to follow through things. And scouts sometimes, like 99% of the time, they never come true. But this time it kind of worked out. So I ended up calling, talked to the dad. The dad was a backup center for Bill Russell at USF back in the day. And the kid, he told me the story. "Hey, we're working out tomorrow." And this was like, I don't want to say like 2 weeks before the draft. And you were working out, and I went out to watch his Legion practice. He was working out. I saw this kid throw. And all we were doing was playing catch that day. They didn't take BP or nothing. And I actually, Dad told me he was a pitcher. And so I went home, wrote a report on the kid. It's a great body and the whole bit. And so it comes to the 43rd round, and we take Jermaine Dye. And those are back in the days when there was draft and follow. And these guys know that you retain the rights until the next draft if the guy goes to a junior college and not a 4-year school. So Jermaine was going to go play basketball at I think I can't remember the school, but he ended up going to Casumas River to play baseball when we talked him into it. And he ended up being, when I saw him that summer, he was a switch hitter back then too. And I said, this guy's not a pitcher, he's a hitter, after we took him as a pitcher. And then obviously I left that area and went to Southern California. Another guy came and did the area, and we didn't end up signing him. Back in those days, these guys will attest, some of the draft and falls are there was some tampering going on back in the day, and Jermaine got tampered with pretty hard by the team that actually signed him, paid him a little bit more money than we were willing to, and he ended up having a long career, and kind of wish we would have signed him, but it was kind of a cool story.
Well, so
Jared, I was actually with Atlanta when we tampered with Jermaine.
You were part of that, weren't you?
I had nothing to do with it.
You should have done what I did when I took Travis's roommate when he was under control, and I used to supply him with his chewing tobacco. And I said, "Tell me anytime somebody calls this guy." So I knew who was tampering with my guy.
I tell you, I don't want to sit here, and I probably shouldn't say this, but everybody does try to get an advantage. Chris Davis was one who was under control by another team, and we had some conversations probably when we weren't supposed to.
Oh, we didn't. We never did.
Yeah, that never happened.
No.
Guys, I don't know, Kip, if you want to get into this, or if any of you guys want to step up and take this, what goes into signing a player? How would you characterize the process and the time investment and just everything that kind of is a part of that equation, from, the time you hear about the person to the time, hopefully, the organization drafts him and you try to get him signed as a part of the organization?
Well, I'll start and kind of hand off to these guys, but I do think it's like you have a group of guys that, like, this is their passion for life, right? And then this is what we do for a living. We spend like many, many days on the road away from our families. We sacrifice a lot that way, and it's not any different than the guys today. and basically they get out there and they forge relationships with their area, with the families, with the kids, and you get to know them really well. And obviously you gotta get the talent right, which sometimes doesn't always work out. But as far as like knowing the player, this group we have, I can speak with all the years I've been here. This is probably the best group I've ever been around as far as that's concerned. The passion they have, the work ethic, and just getting to know these kids out there, and it puts us in a really good position to at least we're gonna know what we're getting as far as the person. And we can all talk about this too. We miss on the talent sometimes, and hopefully we don't. But I mean, hopefully we're not going to miss on the other piece of that equation.
Yeah, Jared, I think the time that we actually spend thinking about these players is probably would blow people's mind. Like, and I joke about it all the time, but we literally like think about players constantly. I mean, 24 hours a day, we're laying in bed going, man, I hope this sucker ends up being a good hitter. And for the most part, some of these guys will never know who we were, which to me is like very unique in what we do. We literally like live and die with players that will probably never, ever know who we were. And it's just kind of it's just a different way to look at it. But we spend so much time thinking and talking, and like we've known these guys our whole lives. And the reality is like we observe them, we evaluate them, we write reports on them, and then we kind of gather information. But in the end, there's other than the area scouts spending time one-on-one with them, we literally don't spend much time, other than maybe this year with Zoom calls. But prior to that, probably never.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, Kip used the word, Scott used the word, the relationships that you have with the players. I mean, we were all area guys at one time where we actually had the, to me, it was as big a thrill for me as it was for the player to be able to sit down with them and put a piece of paper in front of them and say, here's your dream, sign right here. And it's a pretty special moment. I can remember it as a player. And I actually get more kick out of it as a scout, just with these guys, the relationships you have with them. And, never tried to force it on them, but become very good friends with several of the guys that I've signed. And it's very meaningful to me. And just that innate thrill to throw them out there and say, here's your dream, go get them.
And we'll get into the relationships in 1 second. Is there, before we get to that, is there anything like Scott talked about, how these guys might not ever really know who you are? Is there anything kind of in that vein like that people wouldn't believe or wouldn't really know about the scouting process? Maybe someone who is a pretty in-tune baseball fan, but they might not even know that this goes on or this is a part of the whole combination of events.
I think a lot of the things that people would not realize is the amount of work that we do with nobody knowing it. I mean, there are your billboard scouts, the ones that'll wear their club's hats and their club's jackets. I used to like to go incognito and just sit back, because if the player wasn't what you thought he was, you could leave pretty easy with nobody giving you dirty looks. So I think the fact that kids may not even know that we're there and being scouted, and parents may not even know that we're there. And all of a sudden you draft their son and you're like, well, I know everything about your son. So it's pretty unique.
Yeah. The other part I would say is like, just because we're there doesn't mean we necessarily like you. I say that to my son all the time when he's going, hey, Dad, there was 3 scouts who came to our game. I go, yeah, I mean, that's great news. But I mean, just as well as I do, like they could have walked in and said, I don't like this guy. I don't like this guy. So, like I was saying, we're always watching. It doesn't mean we want the players to play well and be good players, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to like them. So to me, like, just because there's a bunch of us there doesn't necessarily mean that like we're all in love with the guy. So that part I think is a little, people take that the wrong way sometimes.
Right.
I think personally, there's a lot of strategy that goes on in this. in this we do. And as Scott kind of alluded to, I go to games of guys I don't even like because I want them to see that I was there. I've never been a billboard guy either, and I've hidden a lot of games and done all those things. But I think there's a lot of strategy that people don't understand that goes into this. We're competing against 29 other teams, and this year's a little different, unique because it's only 5 rounds. Where normally we've been 40 rounds for a while now, so that dynamics kind of changed things. But yeah, there's a lot of strategy that goes involved that people don't understand.
And how do you balance that? Because I know that especially the area scouts, you're with the same group. Like I'm with the Braves scout and the Padres scout and the Angels scout, et cetera. And you guys become friends. And I know that there's strong relationships that are formed for people across organizations just because you spend all the time in the world together. But at the same time, like you said, you're competing against them. So I don't want I don't want any big time secrets necessarily, but like how do you balance the relationship without totally showing your hand and being true to and loyal to the organization and I don't know, the strategy behind all of that?
Well, I don't want to speak for these guys and they can talk too, but I mean, a lot of it's just relationship wise. You talk about things that are non-baseball, right? And I don't like show my hand. I won't tell other guys from other teams. I mean, we're competing against them. If I give them information, and I tell our scouts, if you give them information, you might lose a player because of it. So, and I know we all have people in this business we know that talk a little bit, but our group's pretty tight knit and we talk amongst ourselves. But I was always one that, man, I didn't want to lose a player because of what I told people. So I think it's more like based on relationship, not the baseball part. When you see those guys at the field, it's more like, hey, how's your family and that kind of thing, more personal thing.
Yeah, I'd say there's some misdirection involved on occasion.
I didn't want to go there, Lit, but I'll let you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say, I don't want to use the word lying, but I like to call it misdirection. But yeah, I would say like because we've all been in the business for 30 years, like we have tons of relationships with other scouts on other clubs. So yeah, I mean, you're friendly with them. You go out to dinner with them, maybe have a beer or two. But yeah, it's always. I would say like most of the time, it's about the old players. Like, remember this guy, and we talk about stuff. But when it comes to current, it was like totally off limits. And when it did get brought up, it got shut down quickly. So, I mean, I know it probably happens. I mean, I know it happens, but I would say that's a definite competitive advantage that you have. Like you never discuss up-to-date players. You always talk about guys in the past and mostly about the whiffs you had, like I can't believe I missed on that guy or that guy. But for the most part, to me, it's you never talk about current players.
No, especially as an area guy. I mean, that's where you can really beat people. I mean, I bet if you asked the guys that I've worked with on the area side, they thought I spent more time in Iowa than anywhere. Because whenever people would start talking about where you going, where you been, I always said Iowa. And there was no players. There was, I mean, there were a handful of players up there, but it was more geographic than it was baseball related. But, Scott used the word misdirection. You don't ever want to set yourself off as one of those guys, but at the same time, you don't want to give up your secrets.
I think I misdirected my parents in high school when they asked about breaking curfew. I should have used that word back in the day.
Tell them you were in Iowa.
Yeah, I was in Iowa.
A long driveway to get the car out.
Are there any good stories from back in the day of being a decoy or the incognito strategy? Anything fun or just interesting that you guys experienced while kind of being the James Bond of scouting for a game or whatever?
I'll start it off. We got a scout here who will name nameless, but
well, go ahead and name him. We all know who you're talking about.
He had a propensity to climb into trees and watch games, and so there was a pitcher named Dan Serafini. Same high school as Barry Bonds up there in Northern California. And he was I believe he was a first rounder with the Twins back in the day. And I don't know, Ricky, I went to a game with Ricky there and Ricky didn't want me to be seen. So he tells me, hey, you got to go climb in that tree. I go, Ricky, I ain't climbing that damn tree. Ricky goes, yes, you are. You're climbing that tree. What I do? I climb in the tree and watch the game, but I got spotted by another guy. And so I end up getting down and watching the game. So yeah, thanks, Ricky.
I don't know if I have any secret agent stories. I mean, I think we've all slipped behind trees and cars and mixed in with people. I don't know if I have really any secret agent ones, but I knew where you were going with that story, Kip. I mean, Sandy used to tell that story all the time, how he made him climb that tree. Not good.
Yeah, same thing. I would, we've all watched games in our cars, in the parking lot from, hiding out that you didn't want people to know you were there. I would say for the most part, it's hard to like the real secret stuff now is probably, it's kind of gone by the wayside just because there's so much publications and there aren't that many secrets anymore. To me, it's about who can out evaluate somebody else. And that's, to me, like, that's the trick. Know the player and then evaluate them correctly.
Well, you don't remember the days as an area guy where you might be at a game by yourself for a week at a time. I mean, now it's such a pack mentality. You go to a game, there's 30, 40, 50 guys there. When you were there by yourself, you could actually do some damage and hide some guys out. Doesn't happen anymore.
No doubt.
You guys have used the word relationship, and Grouse, you talked about the Travis Hafner relationship and spending the time with him and talking to his family. And I know Scott with Sean Figgins and Kip, we already went through your Jermaine Dye story, but are there whether the guy panned out and it's a name we know or not, is there a relationship you developed from scouting a guy that is special to you or unique in some way?
I'll start with the Smith family. We have Dustin Smith, who's on our scouting staff. And when I first met the Smiths, Danny, his older brother out of Girard, Kansas, high school kid, I went in to see Dan, and you just develop this wonderful relationship with good people. I mean, friends to this day. I signed Danny, I signed Dustin. His dad was a bird dog. I was at their sister's wedding. Just a great personal relationship and friends to this day for me. And I mean, all these guys are special in their own way, but being able to sit down at the East Side Cafe and have breakfast and let the whole town come and pat Danny on the back when we signed him that day was really special.
Yeah, I would say, like, for me, I mean, like I said, I got a couple brothers in the business, so that doesn't count. But to me, like the relationship I have with the Kendall brothers, which is Mike, who's a scout, and Jason, the former catcher. It's kind of a unique relationship. I didn't scout Jason as an amateur. He was in Southern Cal when I was back east. But actually got to know, we hired Mike as an area scout, maybe mid-90s somewhere, and end up just kind of developing a close relationship with both those guys, and including the dad, Freddie. So they have a big family that was in baseball similar to mine. So yeah, over the years, it's been like, really fun and exciting, and just, good guys, great guys to like use as resources, especially Jason, as far as player stuff and makeup stuff, which he was obviously one of those guys that was a little off center, but I would say way off center, but like a terrific guy, a little tough to handle, but really fun to be around if you got to know him a little bit. So yeah, I would say, like, like I said, there's so many relationships you have throughout the game. And to me, like, that's what this is about I would say for us over time is the people. It's not necessarily the players, as much as that probably sounds odd. The people, it's been, that to me is what makes this.
Yeah, I don't really have like any specific one either. It's like, to me, it's more like is the people that I've been around and I've been touched by. And we've got a ton of, like, Grouse mentioned Dustin Smith. He's now a scout with us. Jay Hafner's another guy who played in our system, was a scout. We had Chris Kemp, who was a player in our system now with the Padres. And those are kind of the ones that come to mind for me, guys that were players for us and end up being scouts, and kind of the maturation of their life and watching them grow up. It's kind of very cool. And we're all getting a little older, so it seems like those guys are getting a little older too. But that's kind of thing that stands out in my mind.
All right, Kip, you mentioned the Jermaine Dye story earlier, and you talked about how you were at a watering hole and someone kind of gave you a tip on Jermaine Dye. And maybe now with the internet and certainly with social media and all these perfect game and these tournaments, I guess maybe it's tougher for guys to slip through the cracks, but I imagine back then there was a lot of, hey, you got to see this kid, or let me tell you about my neighbor's son. I see him playing catch and he must be really good. Are there any good stories about like getting a tip and maybe finding a hidden gem, or maybe going to a game and finding a kid who just didn't cut it at all, but their aunt's cousin's neighbor was like sure that this was the next major leaguer?
Like Grouse always says, hey, do you remember Bobby Jones? Or no, not Bobby Jones, not a good name. But you remember Steve Swale? And I go, no, I don't remember him. There's a reason you don't remember him. And most of those stories I have, the Jermaine Dye was the one that did come through. I could give you like 100 stories of people told me a guy and I went and saw him and never came to anything. Those come more mind than the ones that really came to fruition. But I know Jermaine Dye is the one that stands out the most for me.
I think my guy would. I had just been assigned as a bird dog scout, an associate scout in 1988. I was right out of the hospital and that's another story. But they're like, here, go Kansas City, find us a player. Well, I got a tip on a kid out of Paseo High School in Kansas City. They don't have high school baseball. He's not playing. So I go in, try to work him out. He's a McDonald's All-American basketball player, Anthony Peeler. And we take him down and we work him out, and I bring a catcher with me to let him pitch and throw. An incredible athlete. We ended up drafting him in the 44th round, I think, that year, and obviously couldn't sign him. And he made a very wise career choice, playing about 15 years in the NBA. But that was a tip that actually had paid off. I mean, this kid was some kind of baseball skilled. If he wanted to play it, he could have played any sport.
Yeah, I got a quick one. This doesn't necessarily include me as finding this guy, but we had to hire an area scout in the Northwest. I was with Pittsburgh back in the, late 90s maybe. And I hired this area scout like a week before the season starts. He's got no idea what he's doing, but I just said, just run around and just kind of find some players if you can. A month later, he calls you up. He goes, I found this runner at Walla Walla Community College in Washington. I'm like, so he tells me he's an 8 runner, which in our scale is like top of the line. And he's 22-year-old center fielder. And this is junior college. 22 is not a good sign. And he played junior hockey up in Canada. I'm like, what? So long story short, I go, all right, keep an eye on him. I'm not gonna go see him just in case somebody catches me. So I don't go see him. We end up drafting him. It was Niger Morgan. Nobody knew who this guy was except for our scout. And I won't tell you the reason why he was going to Walla Walla every couple weeks, but there was a reason why. Anyway, we actually took him in the 35th round or something, and our scouting director at the time says, I'm not signing this guy. I go, come on, man, we got to sign him. He goes, you got to go see him. So I'm like, all right. So our area guy gets him in a beer league in Bellingham, Washington, and just to get him on a field so I could go watch him play. And I run up there, and they're literally drinking beer. The ages are from like 18 to 55, the players. And Niger's playing center field. And he takes BP, and right then I'm going, all right. And he first at bat, he hits a single and runs like a really fast time. And I'm like, whoa. So he comes off the field after, this is the second inning. And I go, hey, Niger, you interested in signing? He goes, yeah, right. Like, how's $2,000 sound? He goes, perfect. And he turns to the manager, goes, hey, thanks for the help. Packs his stuff up and leaves. And he ended up being a big leaguer.
Yeah, I think he, if I'm not mistaken, he had a walk-off hit in the NLDS in like 2011 that got the Brewers to the NLCS.
Yeah, he was a little nuts, but Tony Plush, he changed his name for a while. He was nuts.
Okay, so Mike, you mentioned Anthony Peeler, and I'm sure you guys have, encountered multi-sport athletes or guys who maybe were destined to be a star in another sport, but you wanted to just see how he looked. And every year in the draft, there's always the college football player, this guy that plays that sport, and you're taking a flyer. But any interesting scouting stories on a guy that ended up becoming a star in another sport, but you were looking at him as a baseball player at one point?
Well, I don't know if star classifies, but there was a high school kid in Kansas by the name of Monty Beisel. Monty ended up playing for the Chiefs and the Patriots. I think he was on one of the Patriots Super Bowl teams. And strong physical kid, big power, was a definite major league prospect. Well, he was a prospect. I don't know about a major league guy, but this guy could have played baseball, but had every ambition of playing football and ended up going to Kansas State. Watching Darren Erstad out in Nebraska. I mean, he was some kind of kicker punter. He could have been he could have played in the NFL the way he kicked. Nebraska was big on two-sport guys. Bo Porter comes to mind. This guy played at the University of Iowa. And our supervisor, Kip will appreciate this, was Doug Gassaway. And Doug had just left to go to the Cubs. And I'm at the University of Iowa watching him play Indiana, who had a big kid named Kevin Ory. And Gassaway comes up in my ear and goes, "Sandy will fire you if you turn in a guy like Bo Porter. Don't even think about it." Well, I turn him in. Doug ends up drafting him, and he thought he could. That's like going back to that misdirection stuff. I mean, don't do that. Sandy will fire you. So I maybe didn't push as hard as I could have or should have, but Bo was a good football player, baseball as well.
Yeah, I mean, I lived I had an area in Florida, so we had multiple guys like that. Some really good ones. I guess Dante Culpepper comes to mind. He was a high school player up in Ocala area, and I actually worked him out. I saw him play one game, and it wasn't great. Great looking kid, big, tall. Back then he was really lean. He had great body. I mean, he could hit it a mile if he happened to hit it. It was few and far between, to say the least. He literally had great power, but he just didn't know how to play. And I remember talking to him. He goes, "Man, I'd like to give this baseball thing a run." I go, "Man, I heard you're a pretty good football player." That time he was signed to UCF, Central Florida, and I go, "Man, I hear you're a pretty good football player." He goes, "Yeah, I'm pretty good." And I said, "I'm just telling you." I go, I'm not gonna lie to you. It's gonna take a while for you to play this game. Now, if you're that good in football," I said, "man, you should probably head in that direction." Now, I'm sure other people told him the same thing, but yeah, it looks like he made a pretty good choice.
Who was the guy that we took, Kip? That's a quarterback from Tampa Bay, Jameis Winston.
Jameis Winston.
Jameis Winston. Yeah, we drafted him out of high school.
I was thinking, I got a couple of them, and they're both are University of Texas running backs. Way back, I don't remember what year this was, but I had a good buddy who was a scout with the Phillies. We were living together or close to each other in Southern California, and he calls me up, "Hey, I'm going to work out this dude tomorrow. You're welcome to come." Mike Arbuckle was like one of the senior dudes with the Phillies back then. It was Arbuckle, Jimmy Fregosi Jr., and myself and Ricky Williams strolls in. He was I think at Helix High School in San Diego, and he shows up, and we run the 60, right, when you do it, and we said at the time he ran like 6'3", which is like top of the scale running, and Fregosi there, "Hey, make him run it again." I think where clocks are wrong back, and he ran it again. And all I could think about was like, this guy's a big time running back. I would not want to step out in front of this dude and try to tackle him when he's running. It was like a physical dude. Ricky, actually, I think the Phillies ended up taking him and signing him a couple years in the minor league baseball. And actually that year I saw Ricky play in a game, and the pitcher he faced in that game in San Diego was Chad Hutchinson, who ended up being a Cowboy quarterback later on. So they faced each other in high school, and actually Ricky was the only one that actually could have good at bats against Chad in high school. I mean, it was pretty impressive. Then the other one in the Midland area, Jay Bird Eddings was the area guy, and went in there, and there was a player we're looking at was the younger Nix, which Nix, not Lance, but Jason. Jason Nix was in there, and Sid Benson was on the other team. And so Jay goes, "Hey, you want to see these guys hit after the game?" And I go, "Jay, we can't do that." He goes, "No, I'll set it up." So after the game's over, he pulls Nix and Sid Benson aside, and we get the screen out there, and Big Jay Bird's throwing BP, and Sid's hitting bombs. And I think the Dodgers ended up taking him and signing him also. So I got a good history with the UT running backs in baseball.
Yeah, that's good.
Just a quick reminder for people, if you joined late, if you missed something, you can go back and rewatch this. This is going to be available on YouTube. So if you want to go back and rewatch it, you want to share with friends, whatever the case is, just a reminder that is an option for you. All right. So Mike, I want to ask you about Ian Kinsler. What was the Ian Kinsler experience like for you? Obviously went on and had a tremendous major league career, a chunk of that with the Rangers. I think what stands out about him, he didn't necessarily have the most linear path, I guess, and he also wasn't necessarily a high draft pick. So what was it like scouting Ian, and why does a guy like that, who's one of the best second basemen of his generation, I guess, fall so late in the draft?
He was, I had actually seen him the summer before at the NBC tournament in Wichita. He was playing for Hayes, Kansas. And there was a rumor he was going to transfer into Missouri. And, they ended up landing. He wanted to play shortstop in college, and he had a guy in front of him at ASU, Pedroia. So Kinsler wanted to play short. So he transferred to Missouri. And one of my good friends was the assistant there. And he said, Mike, this kid came in and he flat told every player, we're going to a regional. We're not losing. He had that type of leadership ability. And, he developed a stress fracture in his foot. So he wasn't running very well. So a lot of the guys that were not familiar with him, a lot of times you bounce in from another area and you come in, you're brand new. Nobody knew he could run. I had seen it the summer before. Jared, I wish I could lie to you and tell you I knew he was going to be an all-star 30-30 guy. I would have two guys on this webinar right now calling BS right away. But I didn't. I thought he was a very good player and a very good competitor and a very good leader. We got him later probably than we could have, should have. Grady Fuson was our scouting director. And I kept telling Grady, you don't have to take him here. You can wait, because not a lot of people were on him. And that's one of the things about knowing your area, where you can, it got us a few extra players before we took him. I cost him a few dollars maybe in the draft, but I don't think he's going to complain about it right now. But he was such a competitor. When I signed him at the Chili's at the Kansas City airport to get him on a plane. He was going to go home and go to Spokane. And he was like, what happened? Why did I go in the 17th? I said, look, you're going to play in the big leagues. When you go to your first contract, tell the GM, I got to have more money because you screwed me when you signed me. Well, he did. JD told me, he told him that. He goes, I got to have more money because you screwed me when you signed me. So, he was just a fierce competitor. I mean, a leader, and every one of the Missouri guys were just raved about this kid. And I was lucky he had the stress fracture and nobody saw him run.
Kip, what about you with Rick Helling? He, was obviously a pretty big part of some of those early playoff teams in the 90s and is still heavily involved in the game. Really bright guy from a PA leadership standpoint.
Uh-oh. Rick Helling, I'll segue into that. But I was a young scout in Northern California, and Rick was at Stanford. He was a transfer from Kishwaukee Junior College, which you don't see many transfer junior college at Stanford, and was a football player there. A big, strong kid. We'd seen him early. Lenny Strelitz, the West Coast guy, we'd seen him early. We both liked him, and there was a question when Sandy Johnson, scouting director, came in that he could throw hard enough, right? And so we're getting close to the draft, and Lenny and I both liked him, and so. We decided to set up a lunch meeting with Rick. Back in those days, Stanford was a little tougher to meet with guys, so we kind of had to go back door to get to Rick and have him meet us at lunch. But we brought him there, and we were Lenny kind of broke it up, and he was honest to him. And he basically told him, "Hey, Rick, my boss doesn't think you throw hard enough." And Rick looks at him, and Rick was a heck of a competitor, in his day, and still is. But he looked at him and said, "You don't think I throw hard enough?" And then he goes, "No, I think you throw hard as my boss doesn't." He goes, "You're going to see me." They had a Tuesday game getting ready for a regional, and he was going to throw 2 or 3 innings of that game. He says, "You going to be there Tuesday?" And Lenny, I go, "Yeah, we'll be there." And he said, "You come see him and watch." And we had those old Decatur radar guns back then, right? And if you threw 90 on that thing, it was probably like 95 today. And so Rick he was like 87, 89 on an old ray gun pretty consistently, and like an average kind of a fastball. And so that day we go there and the first pitch was like 93 on the ray gun. He sat pretty much 92, 94 on a ray gun back then. So, and he actually looked up at Lenny in the middle of one of those innings and stared him down too. So, and then after that we told, "Hey, Sandy," and the rest is history. We took him in the first round. I think it was a 22nd pick that year.
You mentioned, the Jermaine Dye connection with the Braves, and obviously the Braves in the 90s were, gosh, I mean, the class of the National League. I imagine there were some guys that ended up having some nice careers that you got your hands on in some capacity. Is there anyone that kind of jumps out from your time with the Braves?
Yeah, I mean, lots of them. It was really at the beginning of my career, so I was like super wide-eyed and excited about anything that happened, and we really had some good teachers back then. Kind of a mix of young scouts and like Roy Clark and Derek Ladnier and um, Dave Wilder, who signed Jermaine Dye. I mean, it was a good crew of young guys and really wily veterans. Mike Arbuckle, who Kip mentioned earlier, was our national guy, and Bart Bryant. Anyways, it was a really fun time. So I lived in Florida near our spring training site, so I was around there constantly. Like I saw Jermaine Dye show up his first day, and you just were taken aback by the body. I would say the one kid I do remember like spending a lot of time with was Andrew Jones, who was an international signee from Curacao, back when that was like way before that stuff happened. And I got to know Andrew from when he was 16 years old all the way through. And we'd spend a lot of time together because I was always down there, and he was a great kid. I mean, just so fun to be around. And when he first showed up, it was like a little skinny, loose, but really no large tools, but did everything easy. And 2 years later, you just go like, whoa. I mean, it changed that fast. He just had a super mind. He was really smart, kind of laid back, but as easy an athlete as I think I've ever scouted. And I saw him progress from 16 years old when he could barely throw to like a laser beam arm, had no power when I first saw him, to, hitting 450 homers in the big leagues, like stuff that you just go. I remember sitting watching highlights of him in the Appy League. That was back when we had the VHS test or VHS video cassettes. And we watch his highlights together, and I look at him, and he's 17 years old, and he tore up the Appy League. And I look at him, I go, man, do you have any idea how much money you're going to make in this business? And he's like, yeah, I mean, he had no idea. So yeah, it was neat to be around that time, because we were like scouting fanatics, and that's how they taught us. It was super competitive. We'd shoot for the moon all the time, which nowadays we probably wouldn't do but we always think like we need to find someone who's going to, when they get there, they're going to impact. And we don't care if we whiff on 10 guys. If we hit on one, we're in business. And that was kind of the mantra of what we did back then.
Scott, how did you get into scouting? What was your introduction and path to get to the beginning of where you, I guess, have been now for nearly 3 decades?
Yeah, kind of a off the beaten path. I was a decent player in high school. I actually broke my neck playing football my senior year in high school. Last game of my senior year, and it kind of derailed my college career. I went and played for a year, and it was just horrible. I knew how to play, I just couldn't do anything anymore. So I actually kind of floated around in college for a while, and started coaching a little bit in Maine. I grew up in Maine, and I started coaching at a little school in my hometown of Portland. And they paid for some classes, and it was almost like a pseudo part-time gig, but I made it full-time, and I worked out a little bit, worked there for 2.5 years, and got my degree, and was just honestly looking for a job. I wanted to be a college coach, and like a real one. And I sent out resumes to 230 Division I schools and got one reply. And I'm thinking, geez, this isn't going to work. So my brother had just got into scouting at the time, and he told me, why don't you try sending resumes out to pro teams? Back then there was only 26 clubs. So I did, but it was late, and just happened that Atlanta was hired in the Northeast at the time. And I got in on the second interview, and got lucky. I got the job. So once I started, I didn't know, back in those days, and these guys can attest to it, like everybody was like fossils back then for scouts. Like every time I'd see a scout, this guy looked like he could barely walk to the yard. So I remember thinking, like, why would I want to scout? Those guys are
kind of like you now.
They were fossils. They were all 55. And So when I started, I was probably the youngest scout in the Northeast by 15 years. And anyway, it was, once I started, I knew it like immediately. This was something I'd do the rest of my life, because it was right up my alley. I could work as hard as I wanted to. Nobody would ever pull me back. It was just really fun for me.
Kip, what about you?
Yeah, I wasn't a very good college baseball player at Washington State and didn't have an opportunity to sign, but played up there for the legend Bobo Brayton, and had some fun times up there in beautiful Pullman, Washington. I think we beat USC a few times.
Sure.
had to get that injured. But I got into college coaching. I was at a junior college, and then I end up getting a job for Dave Snow at Long Beach State. Ended up going to the College World Series in '89, I believe. And we had a lot of good players that were getting scouted a lot there in Southern California, and forged some relationships with scouts, and Lenny Strelitz being one who I spoke about before. I was actually going to the Cape that summer to be in Chatham, to be a pitching coach. And when I got back, Lenny said, "Hey, write up all the players you saw up in the Cape. Just tell me what you think of them." And I did that. And he came to me and said, "He would like to be a scout." And I didn't really know what a scout, did or anything. And like Lit said before, back in those days, you get a stopwatch and radar gun and go to work. And so he sent me to Northern California. And believe me, I was the youngest dude, around as a scout. And these old guys, they wouldn't even talk to you. It took me a year probably for one of those old guys even said a word to me. It was a little different than it is nowadays. And, you had to rely, because there's no cell phones, no computers or anything back in those days. And so I had one guy that I trusted, that I knew, that kind of helped me out a lot. If it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't be here today. But like Litz said too before, it's like this job was like, you could be if you're not a self-starter in this job, you're not going to be good. You got to have your own, engine, so to speak. And it was good. You didn't really have a boss. Sort of when we started, it was like you did your territory and you managed it any way you want to do it. And you work as hard as you want to do it. So, the guys that worked harder end up having more success. And that's kind of how I learned starting out there in the business. And I worked my way up here in the Rangers.
Grouse, you referenced, I guess, an injury, an accident earlier. And I know that kind of played a role in you getting into scouting. It's really, in my opinion, a pretty incredible story. If you wouldn't mind sharing that with everyone.
No, I had, after I was released as a player, I kicked around. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I took my college degree from Phillips University, which, even though the college isn't there anymore, my degree still counts. I went to be an assistant GM in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, for the Cubs minor league team there. And I was involved in a pretty bad accident, near fatal. I rolled a tractor. I was mowing the field, and the tractor I was driving rolled over, pinned me under for 6 hours. And I was in ICU for 9 weeks, the hospital for about 4 months. They told me they wasn't even really sure I would walk again. But I ended up coming out of the hospital with a big knee cage, 2 leg braces, and a cane. And I went to the junior college where I played at, Johnson County in Kansas, just to try to help coach, do the best, anything I could. It's not easy throwing BP with a cane in one hand and trying to make sure you don't fall. It's kind of embarrassing. But
I said, in a beer in the other.
Well, no, I had the ball in the other one. I only had 2 hands, but but it was like Kip. I just, you forge relationships with some of the scouts, and one of the guys with the Rangers was Rudy Terrasas at the time. And Rudy was living in Texas, and he hated coming to Kansas and Missouri. Them Southern guys, they were so biased to the upper Midwest. We never saw them, which was fine with us. But Rudy said, we're looking to put somebody on up here. Are you interested? So I absolutely, and put me on as an associate scout, introduced me to Doug Gassaway, who was the supervisor at the time, and Sandy Johnson was our scouting director. And, those men took a chance on me. And I was driving with a hand gear. I couldn't even use my feet, but they're like, just go. We don't have an area for you, but go. And I was fortunate to get out and sign some players. And I signed Travis Buckley in '89, who I think he's a trivia question. He's the first player in the history of the Rockies put on their 40-man roster. He was put on the night before they took John Burke the next day. But he never pitched in the big leagues. But anyway, they're like, look, you want to coach, you want to scout. And the one thing I learned about coaching is, Jared, I'm not very good at it. I really am not. So I took the opportunity to scout, and it's like these guys say, you're your own boss. And I developed a passion. I mean, I love this thing. And I'm going to backtrack just a little bit to my junior year of high school on career day. We had to write a paper. What do you want to be? I wrote that I wanted to be a professional baseball scout. And I ended up being done, so-
No, seriously?
No, seriously, yeah.
I never even heard of it
Kip,
till-
Kip, you'll probably remember this. There was a guy in California, it was probably 78, 79, and he was running his own scout school. And I sent for his info to help me with my paper. I can't remember the guy's name. I got the brochure he sent me somewhere, but
You know who that would
yeah,
be?
that's what I wanted to be.
Bob's Duck. It's Duck.
You know who I'm talking about? Now you were still in school. You're my age. So,
That was in the third grade.
huh?
I was in the third grade.
I got shoes in my closet older than you.
Well, guys, really, really appreciate. I know that we could probably go on for hours and hours more sharing stories, but I guess we'll leave people wanting a little bit more. But Kip, Scott, Mike, thanks so much for the time, and really appreciate you guys sharing stories with us today.
Thanks for having us, Jared.
Yeah, thanks, Jared.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jared. Appreciate it.
Thanks for all the USC digs, Kip. I appreciate it.
I got more.
I know you do. All right. So just want to thank all of you. A reminder again, if you missed any part of this, it's going to be available online. You can share it with friends. You can go back and rewatch. As I mentioned at the beginning, really, really appreciate your partnership in a variety of capacities with the Texas Rangers. And thanks for hanging out with us here for our Stories from Scouts Lunch Roundtable. We really do appreciate it. We're hoping to bring you some exciting baseball this year. And I guess without further ado, one last thing, texasrangers.com/stay strong. If you haven't been to that part of the Rangers website, check it out. There's a lot of really neat resources, tips, ideas, tricks, stuff from the Rangers organization, cooking stuff, exercise stuff, and just constant updates. It's a great place to go. So be sure to check that out. That's going to do it for us. Want to thank everyone for joining. Again, thanks to Kip, Mike, and Scott, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.